billed as one of the largest public education campaigns ever.
President Biden's chief medical advisor says people need what he calls trusted messengers.
The White House has now recruited TikTokers, YouTubers, and more.
The goal, convince Americans, get the COVID vaccine.
It's vaccination day. It's vaccination day. It's vaccination day!
Today I get my COVID jab, and I'm feeling really fab. For months I have been waiting for this day.
R-O-N-A-V-I-R-US-19. Time to take a shot.
Hey yo, it's Pfizer and BioNTech. You asked for innovation, and we delivered it. Our generation's moon landing equivalent.
Time to take a shot.
Real like you need to vax that thing. I'm feeling freaky all night. You need to vax that thing.
If you wanna get sticky and hot, go get the shot.
Grab your syringe, but make sure you clean it. And stick it in me like you really mean it. Whether it's Moderna or whether it's Pfizer, we're staying alive, staying alive. Shot, shot, shot.
It's time to vaccinate. Faster, Lola. No time to wait.
No more cutting your own hair now. The vaccine's on its way. Oh, got the vaccine and it's being
The doctor that was in charge of my case told me to get used to being handicapped, which, excuse me.
I never in a million years thought I would never be able to get up and go to the bathroom.
46% of all the deaths that have happened for vaccines over the last 31 years happened in the last 3 months with these COVID vaccines.
Where I lose my ability to talk and the full function of the right side of my body.
You couldn't say it. And Dr. Fauci, who I actually got along with, he's a nice guy. He's a great promoter, you know. Not a great doctor, but he's a hell of a promoter. He likes television more than any politician in this room. And they like television. But he's been wrong on almost every issue. And he was wrong on Wuhan and the lab also, very wrong. And we ended the payments. You know, they were started in 2014, and then I can tell you, Mark Meadows came in, and I talked to him, and he saw what I saw, and I said, what the hell's going on? When did that start? Started in 2014, and we ended it. Our administration ended it. But generally speaking, I went the opposite way of Dr. Fauci, what he was saying. For instance, Fauci said, do not close our borders to China or Europe, but I did it anyway. And months later, he said I made the right decision and saved thousands and thousands of lives. He said it was the right decision, but he did not want to close that border. I said, wait a minute, there's tremendous infection over there. We can't let this happen, and we closed it, and I think we saved hundreds of thousands of lives. You remember the number was 2.2 million people in our country who were expected to die. Fauci said powerfully at the beginning, no masks. You remember that? No, masks don't work, masks don't. And then he went into masks, and then he became a radical masker. I would call it, if you have 3, if you have 4, get a pair of goggles also, ideally. And let's wear them for another 5 or 6 years. But Fauci has perhaps never been more wrong than when he denied the virus and where it came from. The time has come for America and the world to demand reparations and accountability from the Communist Party of China.
He says the mother and grandmother was healthy before she got her shot and that her sudden death came as a shock.
I am in the hospital with heart complications from the COVID-19 vaccine.
The CDC has confirmed higher than normal cases
of heart inflammation in 16 to 24-year-olds.
A football player is dead
after collapsing
just hours after getting his second
dose of COVID vaccine.
Loved ones say the 17-year-old's heart stopped, suddenly collapsing.
The player collapsed during practice.
Collapsing during the game.
Collapsing on the tennis court.
He collapsed.
a player has just collapsed.
It seems that there's a second player who's collapsed.
This is unusual.
Never seen anything like this. Yeah, what's going on?
This has been something no one has ever seen before. There is some evidence that some sort of delayed reaction to COVID.
My son is dead because he took the vaccine. They're lying, they're lying, they're lying.
We are pro-vaccine and pro-science, which is why we agreed to let Maddie volunteer for the trial.
Why is social media so intent on censoring it?
No one is letting anyone know. No mainstream media. Nothing. You have to dig and dig and dig to find anything. And even then you're called crazy.
Last week, there were more deaths in America from the COVID vaccine than from COVID itself.
Breaking news from the FDA, which has just approved the emergency use of the Pfizer vaccine for children ages 5 to 11.
By the end of this year, Dr. Fauci believes there will be a vaccine available
For kids as young as 6 months.
And that means millions of young children can get their first dose right now.
We just want you guys to believe that this is real. We are real people experiencing these side effects.
It's a crazy thing to vaccinate them with something that is actually 50 times more likely to kill them than the virus itself.
We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin.
What is the problem? Get over it.
Come on, people, just get the shot.
It's what we've been waiting for, to embrace all that life has in store. It's time to make new memories.
Once you got the vaccine,
hug your family.
It's time to hug your family.
Feeling so relieved.
Oh yeah, we're feeling so relieved.
No lockdowns, we're free.
Just get a vaccination.
From the slave to the crickets make a sound. Where's the bold and the brave? We all have to stand our ground. Oh, of the slave to the crickets make a sound. Where's the bold and the brave? We all have to stand our ground. This is a war on religion. This is a war on the children. They give you the cure with the sickness. This is a war on tradition. This is a war on religion. This is a war on the children. They give you the cure with the sickness. This is a war. This is a war.
What do we got to lose, you know?
A lot.
Well, it's fair enough. You know what we got to lose is our children's future.
That's right.
This is worth doing because of our kids.
A bullet is heading towards your child. This is a clear and present danger, administered at the end of a public health administration needle.
Nothing I have done in the last 18 months that has made me infamous or famous, take your pick, has been because I'm a lawyer. It's been because I'm a mom. I think the parents are the new warriors.
I have 8 children, and I want to leave the world a little bit better and safer for them and for your children and for all of our children.
Something is not right, and it feels very much like when we escaped communism in Vietnam.
Fear is immune suppressive, one of the most powerful things, second only to anger. So if you want to stay well, joy, hug, love, forget the narrative.
When we do that, we become one. And that is what they're afraid of. That's why they locked us in our house. That's why they're pumping fear at us every day.
It's a celebration of what we can use to connect ourselves into the organism called humanity, which then fully informed cannot be enslaved.
I told someone the other day that lost their job, I said, you were freed. Take that freedom and figure out what you're supposed to do with it.
We expect their conversation to be wide-ranging, to cover a range of topics of mutual interest, everything from COVID-19 and our efforts to address the global pandemic.
There is something that is of a critical nature that we all need to be aware of. And this is similar to back in February of 2020. I feel like it's almost a deja vu, because that's when I first started talking about this, and the rest ended up, unfortunately, I wish I'd been wrong, but most of it has transpired since then. And the question that I was always asked is, what do you think about this second wave that they're talking about? Do you think that there'll be a second wave? And I said, of course there's going to be a second wave, but it's not going to be from the virus. It's going to be from the vaccine-induced injury, which will be compounded by the fear that they've created, which will be further compounded by the introduction of new technology, i.e. the 5G.
Started cutting down literally thousands and thousands and thousands of mature trees in urban streets. And there were big protests about it. You know, Sheffield claimed to be a green city, but all these mature trees were coming down, thousands of them. And my brother, he works as a call-out bus mechanic. So a bus will break down, they'll call him, we'll come down and fix it on the side of the road. So he's traveling all the time. And he's saying it's amazing how many mature trees are being cut down. Now, the worst nightmare of 5G in a street is mature trees, because it can't get through them. They don't want urban trees for 5G because it won't go through solid objects very well at all, and it doesn't travel far. So we're going to have this explosion of 5G transmitters, and then, going back to what I said earlier, and they've admitted this too, there's going to be like 20,000 satellites up there beaming 5G at the Earth.
What is our exposure in a day? It's not one cell phone. It's cell phones, it's multiple wireless networks, it's smart meters, it's cell towers. It's this sandwich, and it all adds up. And this is a serious problem for occupational health, public safety, and personal safety. And I feel that it's irresponsible to be even talking about the Internet of Things and rolling out a new untested technology when we're not even measuring what are our current exposures from the current networks.
A few days ago, a group of scientists, doctors, environmental organizers, and concerned citizens got together and they called for the urgent stop to the deployment of 5G. They said that it's been proven harmful to human bodies, that this is an experiment on humanity, and that this should be called a crime under international law.
"5G is a weapon. It's used by the military. Do you know these 5G millimeter wave technologies are used to scatter crowds? They drive up in this technology when they want to scatter a cloud, and they put out these frequencies in a much higher power than 5G will be initially with us, but the same frequencies. And people scatter because they get the feeling their skin is on fire, because the human body, including the skin, is an antenna. It interacts with frequencies and it receives and transmits information. At the cutting edge of understanding of DNA, scientists know that DNA is a receiver-transmitter of information.
I have to tell people 5G story. It's bigger than the Holocaust. It's bigger than anything you've ever heard. I'm Mark Steele. Anybody who hasn't heard me. I'm a weapons systems head-up display expert. I'm one of the leading experts in the world. I've actually brought cover in relation to this. The reason I became an expert was because I invented 5G is a killer. Do not believe a single word I say. Not one. I want you to do your own research. You'll find it's absolutely terrifying.
There are going to be boxes broadcasting 5G, this weapon, down every street, all over the world.
What we're concerned about 5G is that it's going to require a transmitter about every 3 to 10 homes. So you're talking about a small cell tower placed in front of your home.
Because at these high frequencies you can't have...
It doesn't travel very well.
Yeah.
And people need to understand, it's 24 gigahertz to 90 gigahertz. These are not 2 feet. These are 2 inches to half an inch. And this is very dense wireless radiation hitting our bodies. What we know is that it pulses more, it's got higher frequency, more waves per second, it beats up the cells more.
Let's talk about today's technology, what we have going on today. Your phone is constantly sending electromagnetic fields in and out of each other. Whether or not you're receiving a notification right now, all of our digital tech sends this data back and forth, right, using these invisible microwave radiation signals. That's today's tech. We have every cell tower, every router constantly pulsing with radiation, whether or not you're using it. Science shows that this causes DNA damage, cancer, among other things. But don't take my word for it.
And that's just with 4G.
That's just with today's technology.
Before we get to 5G, right now you got some of it, but not that much.
Wireless radiation has biological effects, period. These effects are seen in all life forms: plants, animals, insects, microbes, In humans, we have clear evidence of cancer now. There is no question. We have evidence of DNA damage, cardiomyopathy, which is the precursor of congestive heart failure, neuropsychiatric effects. So 5G is not a conversation about whether or not these biological effects exist. They clearly do. 5G is a conversation about unsustainable healthcare expenditure.
So we are electromagnetic, electrical organisms, transmitters and receivers of information. When our electromagnetic fields are in balance and harmony, we have health. We have psychological health and we have physical health. The reason that this technological society is causing so much psychological and, quote, physical disease is because these frequencies, technologically driven, and we live in this Wi-Fi world now and all the phone masts and all the rest of it, these technologically generated frequencies are scrambling the balance of the human electromagnetic electrical communication systems. And if you scramble them, you create a state of disharmony, dis-ease, which plays through to physical and mental, emotional, psychological dis-ease. And there's another point to this. The brain processes information electrically. It communicates with the cellular structure electrically, and it operates within a certain band of frequency. If you can broadcast frequencies carrying information, this technology has long been known, carrying information and perceptions within the frequency that the brain decodes information, the brain will decode those frequencies and will have those perceptions. You can influence people's perceptions externally by broadcasting these frequencies that we interact with, because we are antenna. Okay. Now, some decades ago, there was a guy who worked out the frequencies of different emotional states. This is long ago. I mean, it's very, very sophisticated now. So every thought, every emotional response is a frequency. It generates a frequency, and it is of itself a frequency. Hate is a frequency, and it's different to love. You know, when you are in a room and there's lots of aggression and conflict and hatred, you feel it. What do people say? Oh God, you can cut the atmosphere with a knife in there. That is because the frequencies of hate and conflict have been so generated, they have changed the electromagnetic field of the room.
Okay, so 5G is going to be weaponized against us potentially.
Yeah, but the point being that they worked out the frequencies of various emotions, including rage and what have you. And basically, they can play across a community these frequencies without anyone knowing, and it starts to have an effect, and it starts to build rage, it starts to build anger, and people might not realize why they're feeling it, but they start to feel it. And then what they do is they trigger that with an event. Maybe some guy is attacked by the police or something, or somebody's arrested for something they didn't commit, and now there's the trigger. The blue touch paper's been lit of this manufactured frequency-driven rage, and you have mass riots and what have you, and people do things that they wouldn't normally do. And you can make people depressed. You know, the American military, they've admitted this. They have technology that fires frequencies at the enemy that basically breaks the enemy's spirit, so they give up and put their weapons down. This is the technology we're dealing with. Now you take that into account and then you think of 5G. First of all, 5G doesn't travel well because of the nature of its frequency. So instead of big towers, as we have now, broadcasting these frequencies long distances, it won't do that. And it doesn't go through solid objects, what we call solid objects, very well either. So to overcome that, there are going to be boxes broadcasting 5G, this weapon, down every street, all over the world. You're talking phenomenal numbers of these boxes broadcasting, like on the lamp standard outside your children's bedroom and stuff. broadcasting this stuff. There's no way you'll be able to go where you'd be in a field of 5G. And another interesting thing, I don't know whether you've noticed this,
which some people were saying is going to cause COVID. Of course, it's not going to cause COVID, but the science is clear that it causes a disruption in the voltage-gated calcium channels, causing a permeability to many different pathogens, especially enveloped viruses, of which coronavirus is one of those types, but for any type of pathogen. So this was what the concern was back then. And of course, we've seen that happened, and then the multiple waves that came out. Well, now there's something that is going to be taking place, and I've had multiple confirmations of this, and actually heard a video and talked to one of the parties that had put that video out. And to say the least, it's disturbing, but I'm going to go ahead and just read this to you. And some of you may have already heard about this. So essentially, what appears to be coming down the pipeline is that what has been introduced within the vaccines as we know them, the COVID vaccines, regardless of the type, they have introduced into individuals through these vaccines and the subsequent boosters other components. We have all heard of some of these components. There's talk about the nanotechnology. There's of course a spike protein. There are all these different things that have been found. There's been the graphene oxide, the graphene hydroxide. There's been all sorts of different things that have been found within these vaccines, and still things that we haven't discovered. I know that about a year ago they found Roundup, okay? That's glyphosate. That's a weed killer in the vaccines. Now, what is a Roundup, a weed killer, doing inside of vaccines? We don't understand that, but obviously there's all sorts of things that are being found that shouldn't be in the vaccines. But this portion that I'm going to talk about now is something that has been, I guess the right word would be, I had suspicions that they're introducing something into the vaccines that are designed to cause a detrimental effect at a time when they want the detrimental effect to take place. Meaning that it's almost like a sleeper cell within your own body. It's there, you don't know it's there, there's no effect from it, but then it can be called upon or triggered based upon any type of signal or chemical, or maybe two inert, relatively innocuous ingredients, but when they come together, they cause something to happen, and that would be the trigger, if you will, that would cause these sleeper cells within your body to awaken. Now, I've felt that for a long time, in fact, even before COVID, that there were things that were being introduced into our bodies that shouldn't be introduced into our bodies. But now we have confirmation of this, and I'm going to
coming out of Germany. Dr. Jane Ruby is with us. A group of doctors and lawyers have examined the blood of inoculated patients, and you have their findings. Thanks for being here.
Yes, Stu. This all surrounds a physician in Germany by the name of Dr. Barbel Gittala. Dr. Gittala sees patients. She gathered together in her office in Germany two attorneys and another physician. And what she was sharing with them was her concerns over her patients who have been inoculated. And so this is just incredible, Stu, because not only are we going to show you today the blood samples that she's seen, and by the way, she's doing 10, 12, 15, in her words, of her patients per week. So this is overwhelming evidence. But they also got hold of a vial from Johnson & Johnson. They take you through it in their video. I'm going to send you the clip. It'll be on your website. And first, I want to, before we get into what they saw in the vial of Johnson & Johnson injection, I want to take you through these blood smears that Dr. Gittala is revealing, because this is the stunning evidence. In the first picture I'm showing you, picture 1, you see moments, in her words, moments after the patient got to her office. She took her blood smear and immediately put it under the microscope. These are regular microscope pictures, by the way. You can see this very lit up a piece in the middle. You can see the blood in the background. They look like coins stacked up. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. In the next picture, Stu, we've marked it's picture number 4. You can see this very coiled piece with a metallic sheen. And Dr. Gitala says in the middle here that this coiled structure does not absorb light like the red blood cells do. And then you can see in the background all these red blood cells, and they look like they're all stuck together, which they are. And I wanted to call your attention now to picture number 5 of the blood, where you see this elongated, very shiny tubular structure going through a group of red blood cells. And Stu, what these blood cells demonstrate is a stacking phenomena that's called rulio. I want to share with your viewers. The rulio formation of red blood cells is really a stacking of 4 or more red blood cells. And you can see in the photo here of the red blood cells that they just line up like a stack of coins. It's normally found in patients with blood cancers. And I want to just read this. Rulio formation refers to the stacking of 4 or more red blood cells. The red blood cells normally, by the way, have a negative charge, Stu. That's so that they repel each other, and for good reason, because they're not supposed to stick together under normal, healthy conditions. When this material apparently is injected into people, it changes the electron charge to positive. And so that's why they're stacking together and they're clumping together. The doctors and the lawyers in this video opine that this is likely the beginning of thrombotic activity. Now, let me move on to picture number 6 of the blood, where you see it's pulled back a little bit. So you see that metallic coil that she calls a roll of coins, but in the surrounding areas, there's no doubt about these red blood cells are clumping together. They're forming their little stacked rulio formation. And she actually says in the video, I'm afraid for patients when I take their blood of the vaccinated and I put these smears under the microscope. I'm literally afraid for patients. Some of the things that she said were, she's never seen these structures before in all of her years. She's not a young woman. She's practiced for many, many years. She also says that the rulio formation across all of these patients is severe. So we're looking at severe red blood cell damage. She also says these anomalies I cannot interpret, to be honest with you. So I want to move on to the pictures of what they found when she took droplets of the Johnson & Johnson vial that they were able to secure. By the way, they do not disclose how they got it, what the chain of custody was, but they do show in the video one of the vials, and one of the lawyers comments that that is a lot number. It's got an expiration date. These are all similar findings to what the Spanish researchers found. So I want to move on to what she found under the microscope and what they reveal in the Johnson & Johnson vial. So in the vial pictures that I've provided, picture number 1, you actually see her computer screen. And you see this very rigid structure with these tiny little dots in between. And so if we move to picture numbered 6 of the vial pictures, it's a little bit of a closer zoom in on those structures. And you see these little dots in between. And she says, we have these little, this is the Johnson & Johnson vial. She said, we have these little dots in there. Again, she said, these are very fine grains. I've never seen them before. And so the people, the 2 lawyers and the 2 doctors in this video are stunned. They talk about the fact that they know that doctors are afraid to come out and talk about this. The 2 lawyers discuss the fact that if they could bring this to a court, they're afraid that judges are afraid to be the lone judge that expresses honesty and shock at this. They say it's the responsibility of these companies like Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J to disclose what we are really seeing in these pictures. And it's just unbelievable. And I want to name, by the way, because it is in the public domain, everything I'm sharing with you, these doctors. There's Dr. Barbel Gitala, who is the physician who did these examinations and analyses under her microscope. Then we have Dr. Axel Bolland, another German physician, who basically says in the video that we've got to warn people because they're giving this to children. He's trying to protect the children. He also says that it's absurd because in Germany and throughout the world, they're giving these injections to hospice patients. These are patients that want to die peacefully. They've chosen to just go peacefully to their death without invasive medical procedures. And yet they're being forced to take these injections, at least according to Dr. Bolland in Germany. I wouldn't be surprised if that's happening in the United States. And you'll see pictures when I've shared pictures of the physicians. Picture number 4, you see Dr. Gitala sitting at her desk in front of the computer with the other folks, and she's showing them on her computer screen these horrific pictures of the patient's blood. And Stu, she's probably got hundreds of these slides coming up, and she has said on the film, I've never seen anything like it. I'm afraid for my patients. These are just serious blood anomalies. And I don't know where this goes next, Stu, but we also have a video that's just come out from some physicians in France. They've put the blood of a vaccinated person under the microscope. It's identical, Stu.
So, again, we don't know the chain of custody, but we're seeing multiple slides here. It's very concerning, very alarming. The fact that they're concerned about going to a judge because the judge doesn't want to be the lone judge. I will just put all of them in a group right now. There's a line in the sand here. Whoever is not warning you about the potential dangers of this is complicit in whatever happens to anybody as a result of these shots that have been proven to be dangerous and in some cases deadly. There are a lot of people dying from this. We know that there are multiple platforms that track adverse events. We only have access to one, which is the least comprehensive and the least reliable. And we have seen the numbers get throttled on that system, which is called VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, that fluctuates numbers up and down like a big game. It's like a big game. So if you are an elected representative, if you are a politician, if you are a leader in a community, a judge, a doctor, and you are not explicitly coming forward as loudly as possible and warning people about this, there's a difference between, hey, taking these shots is your choice, it's up to you. But providing people with the information, the real information that these things are dangerous, appear to be poisonous, have been proven to be deadly, that is a whole nother thing. And now that we have this new data, that we have these slides, if it is not looked into, if it is not investigated, and if you don't warn people, you're on the other side. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, absolutely, Stu. I think we need a panel. If somebody could get a panel together of Dr. Gitala and her group, of Dr. Philippe Van Welbergen, of the French doctor who just came out with the same exact blood smear. And Stu, one of the things that the lawyers brought up in Dr. Gitala's group was that there is gross lack of informed consent, which is what you just alluded to moments ago. And people don't know what they're getting. So I don't know how much more evidence we need, but I think I want to put a call out to physicians in the United States. If you have access to a regular microscope, start doing blood smears of your patients who have been inoculated. If you want to take the word of the government and the CDC, at least take a look at these blood smears, talk to your colleagues. And if you still feel these are, quote, safe and effective, I don't know what to tell you.
There was a nurse on Tucker Carlson's program last night who bravely came forward, and she said, it is our job to question everything, to advocate for these patients. It is our job. We question doctors constantly. At this point, nurses and doctors need to remember what their oath is. Doctors specifically need to remember what their oath is. And at this point, you need to take the opportunity to either confirm or contradict what we're seeing here. Grab a microscope, look at the blood with the permission of your patient, of anybody who has taken this injection, inoculation. Do your own research. Do the research and bring it to the people. This appears to be a poisonous injection at this point. If it is destroying the blood, like what we're seeing in these slides, and we already know about the Spanish researchers, La Quinta Columna, the Fifth Column,
Yes.
these people. We have heard when you were hosting over on another platform, Dr. Carrie Madej said that she has viewed slides that
Yes.
have come from a particular vial. She hasn't released those slides yet, but she said that what she saw was completely alarming. I don't know the words that she used verbatim, but she was really emotional when she was talking about her findings after looking at these slides. People not coming forward are now complicit. This is no longer, it's your choice, because people don't know what they're choosing.
And talk to you about what is actually in there. So essentially, now from two different sources, we have confirmation, and I've talked to one of those sources myself, that there's something within the vaccines that is being considered as a bioweapon, which is, again, not a new term, but that this particular component within the vaccines, it's almost like a payload. And I think of a payload, what does that mean? A payload. A payload is like when there's a detonation, you have a truck or a trailer and it's got a bunch of dynamite or explosives on it. So they call it a payload. It's designed to deliver a massive eruption or detonation. So they call it a payload because it's not it wouldn't be like a normal onslaught. It would be like a massive onslaught. And so there's going to be a payload with some type of pathogen that will be activated by a sequence of 5G bursts. And these will be basically off of 16 to 18 gigahertz frequency. And it will be essentially 3 bursts that will be sequential and last a minute. And those will be designed, that those bursts will actually create a signal that will release this payload that is within the hydrogel component of the vaccines. So what exactly is in there? There's supposed to be 3 pathogens, and these 3 pathogens are, I'm not 100% sure what these pathogens are, but one of them is what they call the Marburg virus, which is essentially a pathogen that mimics the hemorrhagic fever, that creates the hemorrhagic fever component. It's similar to that. And according to, if you look that up, it says that there's a 22% to up to a 90% mortality. And Google says it's an 88% mortality, meaning that out of every 100 people that get it, 88% or 88 out of 100 will die. Now, that's designed to justify once that release has taken place, once that signal from the 5G towers signals this release. Let me take that back. It's a sequence of 3 bursts that lasts a minute long, and it's using the 18 gigahertz frequency, or maybe it's the 16 gigahertz frequency. I don't know specifically yet which one, but it's between 16 and 18. It will cause the hydrogel to release this payload of a virus or viral load, and they are supposed to be 3 different types. I don't know all the 3 different types as I mentioned, but Marburg is supposed to be one of those. When that happens, then everybody that's had the vaccine and these boosters will have this Marburg virus released. And again, we know that 22 to up to 90% mortality rate, but that's when somebody encounters it, in a natural way, if you will. When it's inside your body, already introduced and now released within your body, it's probably going to be 100% mortality rate, meaning that everybody that has it, it's going to be triggered and it's going to be released. And when that happens, yes, obviously these people are going to die. And so we're talking, not hundreds of thousands. We're talking about millions and millions of people worldwide. They're going to have this effect. But what's even more concerning than that, and what could be more concerning than that, guys, remember, everybody had a choice. Some people chose to take this. People ran for it. And I can't say that I'm disappointed, because when you've talked as much as I have about this issue and try to warn as many people as I've tried to warn, and they still do it, at a certain point you say, there's only so much I can do, and I'm not gonna sit here and have tears that are being shed because people were not smart enough to use their own brains and look at the science, and instead they just jumped on the bandwagon and believed the BS that was being fed to them. Because at that point, people have to be responsible for themselves, right? You reap the rewards and you pay the consequences of your actions. And so this is something that I've been, most of you know this, and many of you have been talking about this just as long as I've been talking about it, over 2 years at this point. And I can't feel sorry for those people. Now, of course, there may be some people that were forced to do it, but even then, the warnings were out there when people would say to me, oh, what am I supposed to do? I have to do this, it's my job. And if I don't do it, then I'm going to get fired. It's your life. You're telling me that having a job is more important than your life? So you're going to go ahead and do that job and then take the shot because you're saying, well, I'm being forced to do it and I got to do it for my job? My God, I'd rather, I've had people tell me, well, what am I supposed to do? I'd end up homeless. Well, guess what? At least you're alive. Homeless and alive versus the shot and being dead in the next 6 months to 2 years. I don't think there's much of a choice there. I think, how can you even say that, oh, well, they're forcing me to? What do you mean? Unless they tied you down and put a gun to your head and said, take the shot or else I'm going to blow your head off. That's the only way you could say force. And I would say then blow my head off. I wouldn't take the vaccine. That's just me, though. The point that I'm making is I can't get upset or sad at this juncture anymore about the people that have had the vaccine. But here's what the real issue is. So, yes, millions of lives will be lost. And yes, it's disappointing. And yes, it's saddening. And yes, it is what it is. There's nothing that I can do to change that. And we've done everything that I could. And many of you have done the same thing. And many other doctors and researchers and scientists have tried to do the same thing. But what's the most concerning beyond that, because again, these people took that, they chose that. They took that option. The most egregious thing is that those massive numbers of death will then cause a sequence of events to start. And once these cells burst and release the Marburg epidemic, then the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization will assume a control because there's massive amounts of death taking place. And that's where that massive danger lies, because if they can now justify, oh my God, there's massive hemorrhagic fever and they're going to take it to the next level to scare more people, to force more people to get vaccinated, you're going to have all those people dying and they're going to try to justify forcing individuals to get the vaccine. And that's where the real danger is. So I don't know when this is going to happen. I think it's going to be sometime this year. We're already approaching the second half of the second quarter now. We're in another 15 days, we'll be in the second half of the second quarter. So as of July 1st, we'll be in the third quarter. So it's more than concerning, obviously. So the question is, what can be done and when is this going to happen? So as I said, I don't know when it's going to happen, but I would assume that's going to be sooner rather than later, only because they're really, really losing control. They're really losing control because more and more people realize the BS that's going on about us, around us. And with the recent strike down of the face mask mandate on planes and transportation here in the United States, they are even more, I think, frenzied and panicked. And yes, they've still got a lot of control. There's only about 500, 600, 700 people that are controlling this entire narrative. And then the rest of the people that are following along, they don't know any different. They're just peons and they're following orders and they've been bought out or they've been, bribed, or they could have been coerced or manipulated or threatened. But I think not. I think it's probably more they've been bought out. And this is many of the medical research, scientific community, and many of the politicians and decision makers and leaders of countries. And I really don't think they know what the full implications are. I think some of them may, but most of them probably don't. So when is this going to happen? I think it's going to happen probably sooner than later, sometime this year. And what can be done about it? What can be done about it? So for those people that, let's talk about the people that haven't gotten a vaccine or a booster. I believe for us, we are safe. We're safe from the hemorrhagic fever. We're safe from the fallout from this, if you will. However, if this is going to become that virulent, you could pick up hemorrhagic fever from somebody else around you. But if your immune system is intact, you should be, I would be confident that if your immune system is intact, you don't have anything to worry about because you don't have that massive payload that's being introduced into your body. But for the people that have had the vaccine, what can be done? Is there anything about that? And I think I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that there was something that we had anecdotal evidence, and we've been working on this for the last 2 weeks to see. And I've been looking at the research and looking at a lot of the older medical journals. And again, I don't have any conclusive proof of this, but I also don't want to talk it out openly, only because I think that this is all being listened to. In fact, I know it's being listened to. It's not that I'm concerned whether the message is being listened to or not from the powers that be. It's that if I don't have a large enough venue to say it, it could be stifled. That message could get stifled. So I want to release it at the Advanced Medicine Conference when we know that there'll be a few thousand people in the room and there'll be a few thousand people listening, hopefully many thousand people listening live, because once we release it, then everybody will have access to some information. I will tell you that it's going to be highly controversial, and I will tell you that it's not going to be a treatment that you have to resort to worrying about, where you can get it, because it's readily accessible. What's interesting is that today I saw a report, and I don't know how old this report is, but it was sent to me by one of my previous patients, and it was very interesting because it talked about how the let's see here, I'll just read it to you. It's talking about how ivermectin, let's see, where did it go? I could have sworn, oh, here it is. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Let me just find this here. I thought it was on a certain sequence. So it's basically there was a federal panel that was put together that recommends, the federal panel recommends against using ivermectin to treat COVID-19 for the first time. All right, this is the first time this happened, that they've actually come out officially and said that ivermectin should not be used for the treatment of COVID-19. Whereas, in fact, in Japan, if you go back and you look at some of the things that have happened in Japan is very, very conservative when it comes to making any type of medical recommendations. And Japan came out and recommended to all doctors to use ivermectin to treat COVID. So it's very interesting how we see these, this juxtaposing of medical opinions being given, whereas in fact the science is very clear, right? Ivermectin is one of the safest drugs on the planet. It's one of the most researched drug, if not the most researched drug on the planet. It is extremely inexpensive. The people that developed it won the Nobel Peace Prize, and it's been used throughout, decades now as a anti-parasitic. And it's been used in all the different countries, and you can get it over the counter from feed stores and such. And when I was first asked about ivermectin, I said I have a lot of experience with ivermectin in all sorts of animals: dogs, cats, zebra, camels, eland, black buck, yaks, cows, every type of animal you can imagine. I have experience with ivermectin. I don't have experience with ivermectin with humans, but as far as with animals, I've been using it for probably 15 years or more. And so it's a very, very safe drug. I've used it intramuscularly. I've used it subcutaneously. I've used it transdermally, many different parenteral forms, as well as, of course, oral. And it's a very, very safe drug. So they're coming out and saying that you shouldn't use ivermectin, and yet other countries have already said that it's very safe to use. And we know how safe the drug is, but don't use a drug that's cheap, that's readily available, that has a massive safety profile, that has been, extensively published with over 10,000 different studies have been published about it. Don't use that, but use an experimental vaccine that was developed a year or two ago that has all sorts of problems with it, that has had the FDA say that they're not going to release the information in the Freedom of Information Act lawsuit that was filed, then finally said that they needed 74 years they needed, or 70-some years they needed to release the data, even though it only took them 1 year to develop the drug and release it to the market. But to release the safety data to the public, they needed 70-some years, which of course thank God the federal judge that was listening to that suit said, you got 8 months to release that information. By that time, 70 years, if you have a newborn child that's getting the vaccine in 70 years, 75 years, whatever it is, that person is going to be 75 years old, assuming that they're going to survive the vaccination damage. So this is how ludicrous it is. And no matter when people say, trust the science, well, forget about the science for a second. Trust your common sense. The science is settled, but people using that stupid slogan, it's like evidence-based medicine. Evidence-based medicine has nothing to do with based on the evidence. Evidence-based means based on the evidence. But the way they use evidence-based medicine is it's everything but based on the evidence. It's all, their definition of evidence-based medicine is a double-blind, placebo-controlled, crossover, multi-center trial. Well, remember this about a double-blinded, multi-centered, placebo-controlled trial is that it's designed to accumulate facts, okay? Which there's no doubt about. There's no argument there from me. It does collect a lot of facts. But to call that science, to call an accumulation of facts and label it as science, is like taking a bunch of bricks and calling that a building. Yes, a building is made of bricks, just like science is made of facts. I agree with that. But you can't take a bunch of bricks and throw them there and call that a house. That's what they're doing. They're taking a bunch of facts, like bricks, throwing them together and then calling that science. That's like taking a bunch of bricks, throwing it together and calling that a building. No. You got to lay the buildings the right way. You got to use that, create a foundation, and then you use that building, the bricks to build the building up. And that's what facts are used to build science. You don't just throw them together in a pile and then call it science, because that's not science. Okay, but that's what they call. They accumulate a bunch of facts and call that science, and that's the definition of evidence-based medicine. So it's this hijacking of terminology and the articulation of that technology is now bastardized and they manipulate it. And that's exactly what they're going to be doing now. That's what they've already done. So taking drugs like ivermectin that are safe and that have extensive profiles, and then saying not to use that, but then saying taking experimental drugs, i.e. these vaccines that have caused all sorts of problems. And we're finding out all these components that are in there that they haven't divulged. They haven't given informed consent. They haven't told people that this stuff, changes your DNA. Even saying things like, well, no, of course it doesn't change your DNA. That's what messenger RNA does. Its job of messenger RNA naturally is to rewrite and repair DNA. So you're rewriting your DNA. And now all the other components that have been found, the nanotechnologies, the metal particulate, when people have the magnet aspect going on, all the side effects that people have experienced, all these other ingredients that people are finding, the graphene oxide and all these other things that have been found, the glyphosates and all these things. And now discovering that there's a payload of pathogens that's been introduced into the body like a sleeper cell, waiting for it to be triggered by an electromagnetic pulse at 16 to 18 gigahertz 5G signal. That'll be 1 minute duration, a sequence of 3 pulses that'll cause a hydrogel to release this payload, and those individuals that have already had, and they're walking around with this payload of pathogens in the system, it'll erupt, release, and they're as certain. It's basically certain death. But then they're going to use those millions of people dying to justify the World Health Organization and the CDC to take over and impart martial law, whatever they're going to try to do to take control of everybody. That's what they're going to do. It's another false flag type event. So I just wanted to make sure that I get this out to you guys. Again, my audience isn't like the millions that were seeing me on YouTube and Facebook before they took me down. But this video is going to go on my Rumble channel. And I would ask for you guys to find that channel and tell people to go there so they can hear this firsthand.
The WHO UN Agenda 2130 depopulation plan via 5G 60 gigahertz millimeter waves and toxic coronavirus vaccine injections. Part 1. Airborne contagious viruses do not exist and are not planned or escaped bioweapons from secret government labs. Those countless pandemic outbreak movies and TV programs are not there to get you ready for one. They are to program you to believe in an absurd fiction in order to con you. Germs, bacteria, and virus proteins are created inside your body, by your body, and are not contagious. The only way to get foreign human or animal bacteria and viral tissue inside your body is by injection. You cannot catch or ingest animal virus proteins from eating sick bats or pigs. The stomach and intestinal enzymes turn them into amino acids and ditripeptides. 60 gigahertz millimeter radiation waves from 5G towers create the same bodily distress symptoms as the fake coronavirus. These radiation waves also create the same exact protein nucleic acid response in your body from the resulting tissue damage that the coronavirus tests are purposely looking for. The patented coronavirus vaccine will indeed have toxic foreign human or animal hybrid viral proteins in it, as well as dozens of other dangerous toxins. Problem, reaction, solution. Vaccines and now microwaves have often been used by eugenicists, technocrats, and transhumanists to cull populations of undesirables and dissidents. As 5G 60 gigahertz millimeter wave towers get switched on in more and more cities, they need a scapegoat for the mass deaths and respiratory illnesses that will follow. They need you to believe at all costs that it is the coronavirus and not the 5G towers. They care not if you believe you caught it from your bat soup or your neighbor's cough, or if you think it's a secret government bioweapon they purposely released. So long as you're too ignorant to figure out coronavirus doesn't exist at all, except in the lab-created vaccine they will inject you with later. And so you will go willingly into a quarantine camp if you are targeted as a dissident protester or undesirable by those behind Agenda 2130.
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Andrew Kaufman, the American medical doctor, professor of psychiatry, molecular biologist, and expert witness. You studied at Duke, MIT, and the Medical University of South Carolina, where you conducted and published original research and lectured to students, residents, and fellows. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, you have contradicted the mainstream media by stating that the coronavirus is not causing a new disease, that there is no evidence of increased mortality, and that modern medicine is the leading cause of death. Today, I'm looking forward to an uncensored conversation about the COVID-19 pandemic, the science behind the virus, and the global erosion of civil liberties. Dr. Kaufman, welcome to London Real.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's really quite a treat to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Before we get started, I just wanted to welcome you to the Digital Freedom Platform, and that's an independent technology solution that is of the people, by the people, for the people. It's available exclusively on our website. I just want to ask everyone watching now to please share this link via the sidebar and let people know what we're doing here. Doctor, I just want to say that I pledge to you that none of this will be edited and that anyone can watch the full version of this episode free without censorship or banning at londonreal.tv/Kaufman. And I wanted to know, what do you mean when you say that there is no evidence of the coronavirus causing disease?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and looked at all of the papers where there are scientists claiming to find evidence for a new virus, that they claim to isolate the virus. And I've basically scrutinized their procedures, and I've compared that to the history of how viruses and other diseases are proven to cause disease and how they're identified. So I've become familiar with the procedures and how they work. And what I've found is that the scientific procedures that have been utilized in all of these scientific studies are actually, it wouldn't be possible using those techniques to isolate a virus and purify it and prove that it exists. So what they've done really is they've done kind of two things. So one has to do with the genetic material, and one has to do with isolating a viral particle. So I'll talk about those separately. I'll talk first about the genetic material. So the general procedure that they utilize is that they identify someone with an illness that is unexplained, like this happened with the first group of patients in Wuhan, China, but it's been done in several other places around the world. And they have taken lung fluid from those patients, and they do this through an invasive procedure where they put a fiber optic scope through the mouth or nose down in through the windpipe into the lungs, and they squirt some fluid there and slosh it around, and then they suck it back up. And that would have basically a mixture of different things. It's a very impure sample, so it would contain, secretions from that area, like sputum. And it would also contain a mixture of different cells, such as our own lung cells and our immune cells. It would also contain various microorganisms that are present in our normal tissues, like bacteria and fungi. And then it also, lung fluid has shown to contain free genetic material as well. And then it would also contain what's called exosomes, which have their own genetic material. And I'll elaborate on what they are in just a minute. And so they took this sample of lung fluid, which has genetic material from many sources, and they added an enzyme that would digest any cell membrane. So it basically allows the DNA or RNA to be free in the solution so that they could do further analysis. And then they've identified a sequence of RNA that they allege is from a coronavirus or from the coronavirus family. But the thing is that since this sample is impure and has many sources of RNA, it's impossible to know what the origin of it is. If they wanted to be certain that it came from a virus, what they would do is take that lung fluid and filter it, because you can purify viral particles by filtration because they're much smaller than any other cells, even bacteria cells. And then you typically use a centrifuge with a density gradient that creates a tight band of these particles that's easy to suck up in a pipette. And then you could take those particles and extract the genetic material and say that it came from those particles. But when you have an impure sample with lots of sources of genetic material, you really don't know where it came from. So what their solution to this problem is to compare the identity of the sequence of this RNA with other known RNA sequences. And they specifically compared it with the SARS-CoV-1 virus, which was the virus allegedly responsible for the SARS outbreak in 2003.
You say allegedly. We'll get to that, I guess.
Yeah, well, the thing is that they used the same exact procedures when they did the experiments for that virus. So in other words, they got the genetic material from an impure sample also, so it's not clear where the origin of that is. So you can follow this back in a chain to some of the original papers, and what I've found pursuing that is essentially the same exact procedures used each time. But how they said that this represented a coronavirus and was related to the SARS-CoV-1 virus, in fact, they call this virus the SARS-CoV-2, is that they looked at the identical nature of the sequences, and they found that it was just under 80% identical. And that's how they said, well, it must be related, and so we'll call it SARS-CoV-2. But the thing is, if you look at the genetic sequence between humans and chimpanzees, you'll find that there's 96% sequence homology or identicality. And so we are clearly not the same as chimpanzees, and no one would say that our genetic material is a part of the chimpanzee family. But yet they're using a sequence identity that has a much lower percentage, under 80% compared to 96, and saying that's a coronavirus because of that. So in my opinion, this is extremely weak science, and without purifying the lung fluid sample, you really can't tell what the origin of the RNA is. So they've used this sequence to develop the main diagnostic test that they're using, which is the PCR test. And aside from any problems using the PCR methodology, we simply don't know what it's testing for because we don't know the source of that genetic material.
Okay, so they're around testing people and they're getting back these results, and the results don't necessarily correlate to the person they're testing having anything that might be related to something that might cause a disease. You could get a quote unquote false positive for other things in the past, including maybe flu vaccines or colds or a variety of things that happened in your past, and now they're qualifying you as COVID-19 positive. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it's quite possible that this RNA actually comes from our own cells. So a positive test could just say that we've measured your own RNA. I mean, the thing is, we really don't know what it is, and it doesn't seem to correlate with presenting with actual clinical illness. So lots of people who don't have any symptoms and didn't get ill test positive for this, as well as many people who are ill and have symptoms test negative. So since we don't really know what we're testing, in my opinion, we can't trust the results of this test at all.
And so, but there are people getting sick, dying, and now we're being told that they've been tested positive for COVID-19. You know, when David Icke was here, and by the way, he was here about 3 or 4 weeks ago, mentioned you in your research, which is why how you first got on our radar. And he talked about the exosomes, which we can cover shortly. You know, he was careful to tell me how the language in the media never says someone died of COVID-19. They died after testing positive to COVID-19. And, you know, doctor, now it's become a meme where even the public seems to be catching on, where, you know, somebody, some wife shot her husband in her home because they were locked down because of COVID-19, so he died of COVID-19. I mean, it's almost not funny that it's become a joke, because the public seems to know that now everything is being overclassified as COVID-19 related.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, this is a really important thing to look at, because this comes from directives from our public health organizations and agencies. So, for example,
CDC as well, right?
Yeah. The CDC issued a special document that's a guidance on filling out death certificates. And they've essentially gone away from their usual protocols where you want to have some certainty about the cause of death. And they've said that even if there's suspicion that COVID might be the cause of death, that you should just put that as the cause of death on the death certificate without any further scrutiny. In Minnesota, there was a directive that said if someone dies and you suspect it may be COVID-19 related, that not even to bother doing a test post-mortem, just label them on the death certificate as COVID-19. And then I also got a document, I think it was from the health commissioner or possibly the governor of New Jersey, a letter to healthcare providers. And it instructed them that in the usual procedure when there's a health crisis, that they normally would send bodies of people suspected to die related to the crisis for autopsy to the medical examiner. But it said in this case to not send any bodies to the medical examiner, to just essentially label them as COVID-19 deaths. And the only reason I could see that they would institute such a policy is that if they sent them for autopsy, they would probably find that they died of a regular cause. And this would affect the numbers in a bad way in terms of if you're trying to create the appearance that a lot of people are dying from COVID-19. So what I've done in order, since you can't trust this data about the cause of death because of these instructions, what I've done.
By the way, just want to interrupt really quickly. I've seen interview after interview with these doctors talking about how there's no precedent of any kind of guesswork on an autopsy and on a death certificate. You just say the evidence. And yet this is the first time they're being encouraged to write down the COVID-19. And you hear doctor after doctor talking about how peculiar this is. And I mean, I've gotten emails from people here in the UK telling me of scenarios where they took in their 80-something-year-old, grandfather with kidney failure. He was forced to sign a do not resuscitate order. He was told later he had COVID-19 symptoms. He died. Later, they were told he was never tested positive, but he was being qualified as a death of that type. I mean, we're hearing this over and over again. It's almost flabbergasting to hear.
One account where someone's child, I think they were a young adult, died in a motor vehicle accident. And on the death certificate, it said they died of COVID-19. And they were really upset because they had no legal recourse related to the traffic accident to, file with the police or get reimbursed by the insurance company because the death was recorded as being from COVID-19.
I mean, that's ludicrous. I mean, somebody told me, I think it was Dr. Buttar told me a couple days ago that someone was driving a car with a face mask on, and he does not believe that those even should be used. Suffered from lack of oxygen, crashed their car, and it was COVID-19. Yeah, it's just hard to believe that's even happening.
It really is. And there's so many accounts that I've heard directly from people speaking with me about this that, you combine that with the official documents and you see that this is going on. And so this is why I don't think you can accurately look at any mortality figures attributed to COVID-19 as being accurate whatsoever.
Why is this happening? Why would something like the Center for Disease Control, ask doctors to fudge numbers to inflate the COVID-19 related deaths? I mean, on such a mass scale and at such a high level.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly not advising the CDC how to proceed. So whatever I say would be somewhat speculative on my part. But in looking at what I do know about the CDC, one thing is that it is mostly funded actually by private industry. So there's something called the CDC Foundation, and you see that all of the major companies that represent the healthcare industry, such as pharmaceutical companies, health insurance companies, medical device companies, et cetera, are the financiers of the CDC. And they certainly have a lot of profit to gain based on having a serious pandemic and needing to sell vaccines or testing kits and things like that. I think the hospitals are in a different position financially right now. But it seems that all of the policies that they've initiated would have to be for the immediate purpose of inflating the perception of the health consequences of this COVID-19 situation. But it's definitely not grounded in reality. When I was in my 20s, I had a job for a couple of years. I was working for the New York City Department of Health, and it was in a CDC-sponsored position called a public health advisor. And my job was actually to go to hospitals and clinics around New York City and review charts to identify cases of AIDS. And I remember at that time, there were very specific criteria that had to be met in order to qualify a case of AIDS. And I would have to hunt down a lot of information in order to find out if the criteria was met. And if it was not met, I couldn't report it as an AIDS case. So the way that they are instructing people to report COVID-19 cases is a total departure from that approach, and it's very unscientific, and it's fraudulent in my opinion.
What do you think are the key pieces of evidence that prove that this was a criminal plot the whole way through?
Well, the key pieces of evidence are several Journal of Virology papers, first in 2004, showing that they cloned SARS-CoV-2, that SARS-CoV-2, and this is a paper by Moore as the first author, and they cloned SARS-CoV-2, and it contains part HIV GP120, which I said on the Epoch Times show that Joshua Phillips presented April 8th of 2020. It also shows that XMRV envelope spike protein syncytin, which is the deadly component of snake venom. And it also is part SARS ACE receptor binding domain. Well, this paper was published in 2004. And shortly thereafter, a group with Reed, Anne Reed, the first author in Journal of Virology, cloned the pandemic strain of influenza A right out of dead corpses they dug up from Alaska. 2004, again, our military cloned the pandemic influenza. And then in 2011, there's a Journal of Virology paper, October 2011. It was submitted shortly after I was fired and jailed. And and it was published January of 2012. And it says metagenomic analysis of viruses from bat fecal samples reveal many novel viruses from insectivorous bats in China. And Zhengli Shi is the last author. And in those viruses are sheep viruses, parvoviruses, baculoviruses, which is what we make some vaccines in, retroviruses. It says right there, feline pan leukemia virus, Maloney murine mouse leukemia virus. That's what XMRV means, xenotropic murine leukemia virus. And you go to the supplemental figures where they said other retroviruses at the bottom of this paper, and it says xenotropic MULV related virus, VP62, the infectious molecular clone that the government admitted was recombinant, and said that the viruses we isolated from people with diseases, with myalgic encephalomyelitis, which Tony Fauci renamed to chronic fatigue syndrome. And my studies between 2009 publication of that science paper and 2011 showed multiple cancers, neuroimmune disease, PTSD, Gulf War, autism, multiple sclerosis from the expression of that XMRV point. So right there, 2 decades ago, we isolated the virus from the people who got the disease. And now they're being experimented on again. And we're being led to believe any of these. In fact, that's what the title of the paper said. Novel viruses. They're not novel. They've been in our laboratories for 3 decades. I did the work. I made the cell lines. I made the clones. When we isolated them from human diseases, they said they weren't isolates. We were wrong in those 2 years when the blood supply had been contaminated for 30 years because Tony Fauci said only gay men, IV drug users, and prostitutes could get HIV, while nurses, women, children, transplant victims, Arthur Ashe, Ryan White, we all remember this. The pandemic or COVID-19 and the bioweapon that was weaponized, the call to vaccine, it was humanized between 2004 and 2011 and today in that bat cave since I've been silent, since our labs were locked down and all the data was removed. They thought they removed all the data. Our book, Plague of Corruption, shows you we weren't intimidated by their threats and they carried out their threats. We have all the sample, we have the proof, we have the cell lines in the freezer. Every one of these viruses were known in 2010. And that was the big reason for silencing us. This is murder, a premeditated murder. That's what I'll present. I'll show you the evidence, the 2020 paper of Surman. 2020 in January, an antidote for Zika, an antidote for Ebola, an antidote for HIV, an antidote, 100-year-old medicinal chemistry, double-blind, placebo-controlled study done in 2015, where kids with autism got their life back, their voice back, and Bayer Monsanto took it away from everyone. The other key piece of evidence in this pandemic, when people started claiming religious exemptions because of the use of aborted fetal cell lines in vaccines, in all vaccines for 40 years against our God. We were told that Bayer Monsanto put out an attestation to their form to their employees that said, we understand you have a problem with the use of aborted fetal cell lines in the development and research and production of vaccines, the COVID vaccine, will therefore attest that you don't have a problem with the fact that we use aborted fetal cell lines in every one of these products, Pepto-Bismol, ivermectin, every kind of blood pressure medicine. And it said not limited to Tylenol. The form is amazing. That's what I'm presenting this week in the task force and have presented over the last 3 months and year, as you know. Well, aborted fetal cell lines have syncytin from other animals, which will cause autoinflammatory disease. So they actually put the peptide component of snake venom, which humans have a protection from their own God-given human endogenous retrovirus W. But if you inject and bypass the innate immune response, you will develop autoinflammatory disease and cancer. And there's 3 decades of work showing that syncytin gene alone in the sperm, in the egg, in every cell of the body changes everything. Cancer, express it in the wrong tissue at the wrong time, and you get disease, foreign disease from other animals loaded in all vaccines. It's been there. We've noted in vaccine court. I've testified. I've shown the evidence of injured and shown these cytokine storms, the exact same mechanism COVID. This is it's irrefutable. It's published. It's in their own journals, just as I showed in the very beginning. April 8th was a full month before pandemic. Mickey Willis produced in Pandemic. Was May 4th. April 8th was that Epoch Time show. And it showed you right there from Fort Detrick, funded by NIAID, Tony Fauci shipped in 2015 when it was illegal to do these gain of function studies, shipped the cell line containing all those precursors I just read to you from 2011 paper with China, shipped it to China in the labs and continued humanizing and weaponizing, changing that monkey SARS-CoV-2 with simian immune deficiency virus to a human immune deficiency virus. And we all know that now. And we all know that from Luke's work and the early work that showed there were variants that had HIV. So SARS-CoV-2 is not a coronavirus. It's a pararetrovirus. Therefore, all bets are off, and they knew well who they were trying to kill, the people with cancer. We see the diseases. We've seen the diseases. That was our work from 2009 to 11, when it was clear because of Tony Fauci's fraud 40 years ago, women and children were infected with XMRVs, with other retroviruses that were disease associated. So the game was to kill them. And they have the same disease cytokine storm as the virus that was released on Sierra Leone, the Ebola viruses. All of these viruses are in these cell lines, are in these shots. Every single shot is GMO. Every single shot is a bioweapon, patentable gain of function study since 1986, and none have been tested. And we see the injury, and the goal is premeditated murder, because in 2009, if you can find a way to make a vaccine safer, in 2009, when we published our paper, it said you can never use these cell lines again to manufacture vaccines. So instead of doing the right thing at the July 22nd invitation-only meeting, the whole government went and said, what do we do about this problem? It was more than just our paper. Cancer, cancer, cancer. People were coming up with evidence of infection associated with the explosion of disease in our country. And that's the reason, because they were liable in 2009. So even with the National Vaccine and Compensation Program, because they never did a single safety study. And that's what we know. Del Bigtree, the Informed Consent Action Network, Children's Health Defense, Bobby Kennedy, Aaron Siri, in the end of 2019, caught them. Freedom of Information Act for years. No, never did the studies required by law. Not a single one. Every single person who was injured by any vaccine is now awarded, or should be awarded, damages. The government is liable. They were responsible. They failed in their duty. And this is the reason for the pandemic. Control us all, kill us, cremate, destroy the evidence. That's why I said we have the cell lines. We have freezers full of them. We weren't We didn't commit the federal crime of throwing data away as principal investigators. We said this in the last chapter of our book, Plague of Corruption. One last story I should tell you. Yeah, they thought we were going to cremate everything. They thought we were like criminal William Thompson, and we put evidence in a safe to destroy the lives of millions of Black children and people of color with the CDC fraud and MMR and autism. They thought they got away with that. But we obey only one God, and it's not Tony Fauci.
Wow. God bless you. How did Fauci get all of this power?
That's described in our book Ending Plague, where Dr. Rossetti, his contemporary, showed you from the beginning. Unfortunately, he got all of this power by similar crimes going all the way back to the gain of function studies that were HIV. Because HIV was not what Luc Montagnier isolated. It was called LAV, lymphadenopathy virus. So Bob Gallo and Tony Fauci conspired. The RICO started all the way back in the early 80s, as I tell you in Plandemic. I was the technician doing those isolations. The electron micrographs don't lie. HIV never was LAV. So you remember then the president of France and Ronald Reagan fought over the novel virus. Well, we all now appreciate you can't patent novel viruses. So Bob Gallo and Tony Fauci conspired. They drove grants towards patents around T cells like interleukin-2. This is all the whole, when the Bayh-Dole Act allowed government workers to patent, they drove patents towards their clones, their HIVs, which the human immunodeficiency virus never was isolated from a human. That's an infectious molecular clone like VP62. And so they've been gaining this power by driving patents, conspiring with Big Pharma. That 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Act was November 14th of 1986. So that's when there was no liability whatsoever. So they just ramped it up, experimented on the most vulnerable, saw exactly the injuries. When you change a few base pairs, they knew exactly what we do. They've got the phylogenetic trees. We isolated the viruses, the natural isolates from the vulnerable, the nurses, the doctors, the children, the babies who got the disease. And we showed their experiments were working, only they had one problem. The people had neuroimmune diseases like Parkinson's, like ALS, like Alzheimer's, like autism, and they don't die. And they can't work, and they live these horrific lives in pain, like it's like things you've never seen before, and we're seeing them now.
And this is intentional. They did this on purpose. Tony Fauci is a psychopath, a sociopathic serial killer. I said at AFPAC, at the America First Political Action Conference, I asked, why is this guy still walking around a free man and not hanging from the end of a noose somewhere? And everybody went nuts. They thought that was hyperbolic. There is a precedent for prosecuting crimes against humanity, and there's overwhelming evidence to suggest that Tony Fauci should be indicted and tried, and if found guilty, fried. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. And it should have been done with HIV/AIDS. There was overwhelming evidence that he drove HIV/AIDS. Overwhelming evidence. The groups act up the political. I mean, what I witnessed those 22 years I worked at the National Cancer Institute, and then back in industry, in pharma, in Upjohn, when you see the collusion in GMOs, they knew as they drove glyphosate and Roundup poisoning of our food and our soil, they knew the synergies they were getting with activating these viruses. So animals would be, our food supply would be sicker and sicker, and we'd be transmitting these not only through our food, but through, the shots and the blood supply of people giving blood. They denied, the misogyny, what he did. There's just no question about what they did. It's all of them at the top. Deborah Birx, Robert Redfield, they did an experimental HIV vaccine in the 90s on the military, on blacks, on the vulnerable. Now they're telling the military that the military if they're HIV positive, they can't serve in positions of power. I saw that run across the bottom of the TV screen the other night. Well, of course you're HIV positive. You just injected it in every single COVID shot. And the people that were injected and tested in the 90s with the Birx Redfield vaccine, oh, those are the people that drove the pandemic. Those are the people that stood next to President Trump. And then Robert Redfield comes out after Biden gets in office and said, yes, of course, it's a bioweapon and we made it in the lab. So and what happened to him?
Did they dupe Trump? Or I mean, who all is involved with this?
Every level of the FDA, the highest levels of the CDC, FDA, EPA, Big Pharma.
And they know what they're doing? I mean, they know that this is what the result is going to be, and they do it anyway. So why is nobody saying, I just can't deal with this anymore. I can't take this. I have to speak out. I think the murders of Timothy Cunningham, Jeffrey Bradstreet, many others, the incarceration of me. I mean, in my life, this has been 13 years. I never got one thing back. I've never worked. I lost $10 million. I fought everything. We lost half our family. Sound like COVID? Yeah. Nobody will stand up there. My colleagues say, I don't want to see my mug shot on the cover of Science. The journals are criminal fraud. We know that from Tess Lawrie. We know that from ivermectin. Tess Lawrie, the PhD that exposed the criminal fraud in the journal. They held secret meetings to say, oh, let's publish faster. And what they're doing now is they're publishing faster, and it's a lie. And they're teaching our doctors lies. It's not our doctors' fault. They don't know ivermectin's a purinergic modulator. The drug companies have been lying forever. These things are essential medicines. They're fabulous medicines. And we could heal all of this if we put all of these criminals where they belong and reorganize and bring back to honesty and integrity in these institutions that are supposed to be protecting our public health. Yeah, well, where they belong, if they're guilty of these crimes, is 6 feet under, cremated themselves. These people deserve a bullet in the head. I mean, they're doing this to kids. These shots have now been emergency use authorized to kids down to 6 months old. And they know what they're doing. So There was never a leak. There was never a bat or a pangolin. The wet market had nothing to do with any of this. That was a complete lie. The media ran with it. The goal here is to permanently incapacitate, to handicap, to lead miserable lives for people, to end their lives early, and to kill them, and to create an infertility pandemic where nobody can have babies anymore, to reduce the nuclear family structure size, to depopulate the world to 500 million, that mean we have to kill like 7.5 billion people, to destroy the United States military, to destroy global militaries, to completely take over the West, to have complete subservience, total control, total domination. But what is the underlying motivator? What is it that is motivating this plan? What do they hope to achieve, to gain from all of this? Is this a demonic thing? Is this a satanic thing? What is it that is moving all of these people to go along with this mass murder, this genocide of sorts?
Yeah, it's a cult called scientism. That's what Patrick Wood taught me. Moderna. I mean, when I met Patrick Wood a few weeks ago in this task force, or a month ago or so now, I was just blown away. Oh my God, it's right there on the screen. You worship Tony Fauci. This is totally satanic. It's against God. And right now it's trillions, because the liability for all they injure, they're liable for. It's trillions. In our first book, The Foreword of Plague, is a disease able to affect the economy of nations. They don't die. I don't think a bullet in the head is good enough. I think some of these shots would do quite well in the old people, as they can't sit in a room with the light, with the sound, with a blanket hovering over their skin, the pain so bad, with diapers on, like these kids have lived, not able to scream, digging holes in their arms from the itch, from the pain. What I've seen, those AIDS patients who, as I said in that movie, I held in my arms while they denied there was HIV in Michigan. And we were told not to touch them as they experimented on the gays. I mean, as they experimented on innocent people, and they knew it. So now the big goal is their trillions of dollars. We balanced the budget immediately if we took the money. Think about how much they just made in patents on their fraudulent PCR tests, made up to kill the very people they knew, the HIV infected. Any vaccination will increase the expression of the mRNA of HIV and spread it through the body of the more than 6 million in this country, and God only knows. When we did our study, 17 million worldwide, and it doesn't just kill them, the damage is 4 generations. So they know it doesn't seem like enough people right now if it's just that 10 to 17 million that you've already injected. But when the evidence goes away, no more cremation, just as Dr. Henry Ely showed the fraudulent death certificates. This is a hate crime against Christians. If we declare our natural immunity, we're taken into those death camps called hospitals, denied any kind of treatment, and murdered, and called COVID to drive an agenda. This is against God. This is a hate crime in America. This is the worst kind of racism anywhere.
And the complicity of the media is actually really shocking to me as well. I mean, it didn't take me a whole lot of work to secure an interview with you. I can sit down and talk to you. Anybody can. Would you deny or turn down an interview with Sean Hannity? Of course you wouldn't.
I've never denied an interview.
Of course. They don't want to speak to you. And they want to continue to lie. And if it didn't take me a whole lot to figure out what the hell is really going on here, these people know. Sean Hannity knows, all of Fox News knows, the producers there know, their management knows, Paul Ryan knows, sits on the board over there, Newsmax knows, OAN knows, CNN knows, MSNBC, NBC, the New York Times, the Post, all of them know.
Correct.
And every single one of them should be held accountable. So let's talk about accountability. Do you have any hope for that?
Not with what I'm seeing today. I always have hope, and I know that in the end, God wins, and I know they'll all be held accountable.
Ultimate accountability. Yes, absolutely. Praise Jesus for that.
That's all that matters. That's all that matters to me, honestly. Right now, my entire goal is healing, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that's what I do. I'm a biochemist who makes drugs out of plants and energy healing. I've seen those miracles of healing those people I told you about, and that's my focus. Anyone who will listen and turn back and turn totally away from them. And Bayer Monsanto told you they poisoned every one of the products with the component of snake venom called XMR. Syncytin. They poisoned Pepto-Bismol. They poisoned Preparation H. They poisoned everything. They poisoned our food supply. They told you, is your problem the purity of the body? Are you going to bow down to us? Because we put those aborted fetal cell lines and those monkey cell lines, just as I showed you. They're in bat caves in China, and they've been there for a decade. So you'll get your monkeypox and everything else, everyone, until you wake up. But you turn around and we can heal. We've healed. We've shown you the mechanisms. We've got the plants. We've got the healing. We've got the honest people worldwide. You never have to worry about one of these things again. If we turn away from them, we can get our country back. That's where it belongs, with we the people. Every one of us needs to speak the truth in love, forgive ourselves and forgive each other. We've all been conned for 40 years. We've looked down on somebody else and blamed them for their illness. And we know this. Oh, you're a cigarette smoker. You're fat. You're a drinker. It's always your fault. God doesn't make mistakes. They're poisoning our food. The FDA is supposed to keep our food safe. We want that. Bobby Kennedy won a case for billions of dollars for Roundup glyphosate causing cancer 5 years ago. Double-blind placebo-controlled study for Sermon and autism 5 years ago, 7 years ago. Nothing's been done. Nothing's been done since. When does it happen? Our food is poison. It's their job to keep it safe. But all we have to do is turn around, because we can live well. I'm infected with every one of those things, and I'll never get disease. We are not our infections. We are not unclean. The unvaccinated, the naturally immune, God-given immunity is all we need. And we don't have to declare ourselves so unclean and worship at the feet of Tony Fauci. And we won't. We won't bow down. And I'm happy. This is what I do everywhere, is tell you how to stay well. And I can show you those miracles, those people that simply trust God and eat well, clean, no more GMO in your world. You'll live a life like you've never experienced, in not only happiness, but in health.
Of the slave to the crickets make a sound? Where's the bold and the brave? We all have to stand our ground. Fall of the slave till the crickets make a sound. Where's the bold and the brave? We all have to stand our ground. This is a war on religion. This is a war on the children. They give you the cure with the sickness. This is a war on tradition. This is a war on religion. This is a war on the children. They give you the cure with the sickness. This is a war. This is a war. My old friend, I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its scenes while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence. In restless dreams I walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone, neath the halo of a street lamp. I turned my collar to the cold and damp, when my eyes were stabbed by the flash of a neon light that split the night and touched the sound of silence. And in the naked light I saw 10,000 people